Hey guys, this week's video is dedicated to the complete recovery of Masha Bas Batsheva. This week, the parsha is the last parsha in the first book of the Torah, in Genesis, Parsha Vayechi. And in it we have the passing of Jacob. And before Jacob passes away, he calls in his son Joseph and he says, I want you to bury me in the land of Israel. I do not want to be buried in Egypt. And Joseph says, okay. But he takes it further and Jacob says, swear to me that you will bury me in the land of Israel and you will not bury me in Egypt. And Jacob swears to him. And the question is why? Why did did he not trust Joseph to fulfill what he said he was going to do, that he would be committed to doing it? And if he mistrusted Joseph, then what would taking an oath help? Like if he was, he wasn't trustworthy. And there points out there's a deeper thing here, that there's something psychological impact that happens when somebody is really committed, so much so that they take an oath. In general, when somebody commits to doing something, the assumption is that it's circumstances permitted, right? Obviously, there are circumstances out of our control. And even if we're committed to doing something, if you make plans with friends, and now I'm not talking about commitments that you're looking for an excuse to get out of. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about things that you actually plan on doing or actually plan on being at. We all know there are things that come up. And if you are truly committed to it, sometimes there are things out of your control. When you promise, when you make an oath, that means failure is not an option. Like, for example, if you make plans to go to a friend's wedding, and you buy a ticket, and in the last second the ticket gets canceled. Well, you were really committed. You bought a ticket. You weren't looking for a way out. You really wanted to be there. But circumstances out of your control, you couldn't be there. Everybody would understand that, right? But if you promised your friends you were going to be there, right? Then what? You find another way to get there. You're committed now, I'm going to be there, come on, man. And you might say, but there are things that you can't control, even if you really want to be there. But the Rebbe says an oath takes it a step further. When you promise something and you make an oath to be somewhere, that obligation now falls on you. So that you would plan for every contingency. You wouldn't fly in right before the wedding. You wouldn't leave it up to the possibility of weather delay. You'd fly in a day early. You'd make sure that you plan for every obstacle that might come up so that you're there. It's not that Jacob didn't trust Joseph. He wanted to make sure that even if there's obstacles, even if something comes up, Joseph would know failure is not an option. He would plan for every contingency. Now you might ask, what type of contingency, what did Jacob think was going to happen that would prevent Joseph from fulfilling what he said he was going to do? And the answer is that it would come from Joseph himself. You see, Joseph knew that the Jewish people were soon going to be enslaved in Egypt and go through a really, really difficult period. Having Jacob buried in Egypt would have been a huge moral, spiritual boost for the Jewish people, to have somebody so holy nearby who is with them in their times of crisis. So Joseph would think that this would be better for everyone if Jacob would be buried in Egypt. Well, then the question is, so therefore Jacob made him swear that he would bury him in Israel. So then the question is, why didn't Jacob didn't want to be buried in Egypt? Why did he insist on being buried immediately in the land of Israel? He could have been like Joseph, be buried in Egypt, and when the Jews leave Egypt, they would take him with them to the land of Israel. If this was provide comfort to the Jewish people, why was he so against it? The answer is that when somebody's in suffering and in a time of crisis, in order to help them, it has to be like somebody from the outside. If God forbid somebody's in jail, in order for somebody to work the justice system and really work on their behalf, has to be somebody who's not in prison with them, but somebody on the outside, helping them, schlepping them out of a circumstance. Jacob wanted to be buried immediately in the land of Israel so that the Jewish people always knew Egypt is not the end. God promised them that he would bring them to the land of Israel. Jacob wanted to be buried in Israel as a reminder to the Jewish people, this is where you're meant to be. It would give them comfort from outside Egypt, knowing that God's promise will be fulfilled. Yes, you're going through a hard time, but you will come back to the land of Israel. As well as Jacob didn't want them to be, get content in exile. Before they were enslaved, there was a period when the Jewish people were living really well in Egypt. And Jacob didn't want them to forget, this is not where you're meant to be. You're meant to be in the land of Israel. And God willing, one day you'll be there. We now find ourselves in exile. While it might not feel the exact crisis in the same way, we should never get so comfortable that we forget where we are meant to be. Shabbat Shalom.